Dnyaneshwari, English translation of philosophical part of Dnyaneshwari, 1290 AD. Dnyaneshwari is a commentary on Gita, written 700 years ago by Saint Dnyaneshwari, Dnyaneshwara, or Nanadeva, 1274 to 1297. It brings Vedanta and other spiritual philosophies to common man. It explains the various paths a person can take for spiritual progress and ultimate liberation. Apart from mythical stories, not much is known about the life of Dnyaneshwari and his brothers. Judging purely by their writings, they lead a hard life. In 1296 AD, Dnyaneshwara, aged 25, walked into a stone-walled room in Alandi near Pune. He had it closed and passed away in samadhi, a state of spiritual liberation. The room has not been opened since then, and Alandi has been a revered place. None of his siblings were to enjoy a long worldly life either, and passed away within months of Dnyaneshwari's samadhi. Dnyaneshwari is a commentary on the Gita, written more than 7 centuries ago by Saint Dnyaneshwari in the contemporary Marathi language in verse form, using the OV style. It brought the philosophy of the Gita, until then the prerogative of Sanskrit pundits, to common man. It is written in verse form as used to be custom of those days. An excellent spiritual seeker's guide, it discusses in detail 4 different paths, viz. the path of knowledge, the path of action, the path of yoga, and the path of devotion to choose from depending upon the psychological make-up of the seeker. It presents the cream of Vedanta philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, Kundalini yoga, and the practice of devotion. While Gita is difficult to understand to a common man, Saint Dnyaneshwari has written Dnyaneshwari, original name Bhavartha Deepika, specifically for common man, and therefore the text is easy to understand. Saint Dnyaneshwari wrote this critique at the age of 16, on the instructions of his guru and elder, only by 2 years, brother Nivruttinath. Nivruttinath was a disciple of Gahinanath, one of the 9 gems, or Navnaths of the Nath sect. Dnyaneshwari, written 700 years ago, is still vibrantly alive, and is regularly read in many homes in Maharashtra. Due to changes in the Marathi language over the last few centuries, the text is not easily understandable, but many prose translations are available. While writing commentary on Gita, Dnyaneshwari Maharaj has used a lot of examples and similes from day-to-day life, and from nature to make the meaning very clear to a common reader. However, with today's educational levels, many of these are not necessary, and often they distract the reader from the smooth flow of the philosophical thought. In this translation, therefore, only the philosophical part of the text has been retained except where there is need for clarifying the meaning. 2. Rather than presenting the translation sequentially, it is presented as a group of sequential verses, omitting of course those having similes, etc., with a cogent meaning and are subtitled, omitting unnecessary similes for modern reader, and further omitting the traditional obeisances made to various deities and his guru. Only 5,752 OV verses have been used out of the total 9,032 ovis, reducing the material by about a third. This translation, thus truncated, is intended more for an intellectual reader rather than the pious. It is the intellectuals who hold executive and professional positions in today's socio-economic world, and are the ones who can influence the society positively or negatively. But their world is a world of perpetual haste, and cannot afford long-winded texts of the old days. Thus a shortened version of Dnyaneshwari is most suited for this class in order to turn their influence on the positive side. Being a commentary on the Gita, Dnyaneshwari also has 18 chapters. Prologue. This translation of Dnyaneshwari contains only the philosophical part of the text. When Dnyaneshwari Maharaj wrote Bhavartha Deepika, now known as Dnyaneshwari, 700 years ago for the common man, general educational levels were not as comprehensive as today. There was no printing press and books had to be transcribed by hand. Dnyaneshwar Maharaj used many similes and examples from human society as well as nature to explain the points made in the Gita. Dnyaneshwar Maharaj belonged to Nath sect, where Guru is worshipped more than any deity, and Dnyaneshwari contains a lot of text dedicated to the praise of and obeisances to his Guru Nivrutinath, who was also his elder brother, elder by only 2 years. Besides obeisances to several other deities, as is traditional in Hindu religious literature. These similes and examples are no longer necessary for today's reader who is better read and informed, and in fact it is the experience that too many of these distract the reader from the main flow of thought. In this translation, these parts are omitted except where necessary. The text involving obeisances also has been omitted as it is also extraneous to the philosophical part. The intention in adopting this approach is to make an edited translation available to an intellectual reader. The pious readers can always use the half-a-dozen verse-by-verse translations available in bookshops. Due to differences in the structure of Marathi and English, verse-by-verse translations pose difficulty in collating the verses to make a single long sentence. In this translations, a set of consecutive verses have been grouped together to make sentences and paragraphs with cogent meaning, and the paragraphs are given subheadings for easy reference and meaning. Thus, this translation can claim to assist a reader in faster reading. By this approach, the text was shortened to 5,752 verses, out of the total of 9,032 verse. Intellectual appeal. This translation, thus truncated, is intended more for an intellectual reader rather than the pious. It is the intellectuals who hold executive and professional positions in today's socio-economic world, and are the ones who can influence the society positively or negatively. But their world is a world of perpetual haste, and cannot afford long-winded texts of the old days. Thus, a shortened version of Dnyaneshwari is most suited for this class, in order to turn their influence on the positive side. There is a subconscious respect for God in the hearts and minds of everybody, and a professional or an executive is no exception. It only needs to find a way out. Intelligence and spirituality seem to be well associated mutually. Greatest spiritual persons were people of high intelligence who were curious enough to ask themselves the question, "Who am I?" and in looking for the answer took to spiritual path, or they were persons who had a natural attraction towards the spiritual path. While some renounced the world and became sannyasis, contrary to the belief many have even today, one need not forsake his family life in order to take up a spiritual path. The reader will find it stated in the Dnyaneshwari that it is not necessary to give up your normal life in order to search for God. You have a choice of paths which ultimately end, according to the Indian philosophy and the experience of the spiritual masters, into self-realization, i.e. a realization that you are no different from the Almighty. That is why every intelligent person should read Dnyaneshwari. There are many reasons why intelligent persons should turn to the spiritual path. Intelligence, like other qualities, is a gift of God. It is not a personal achievement, and therefore, instead of being proud about one's intelligence, the correct attitude should be that of gratitude towards the Almighty for possessing it. Having this gift of God, one may expect an intelligent executive or professional to utilize that gift to experience self-realization. Many persons seem to realize this and become spiritual seekers. A large number of people joining the various spiritual institutions like the Ramakrishna Ashram, the Order of Samarth Ramdas at Sajangad in Maharashtra, and many others are persons of high academic achievement. For many intellectuals, however, there are many initial problems and mental hurdles to be overcome before he becomes a seeker. The first hurdle is the misconception that one has to renounce the world and be a sannyasi for taking up the spiritual path. The Gita, and naturally Dnyaneshwari, teaches us otherwise and considers sannyas as unnecessary. The second hurdle is the fear that spiritual exercises would divert the mind from the duties of the office and impede success. This is also not correct. Spiritual exercises instill a discipline into one's person, remove fear, and make one more efficient. In fact, many yoga and meditation techniques have been adapted for pacifying the mind and instilling a positive approach to life. Many executives pay high fees to attend such courses and workshops where these techniques are taught, and find them beneficial. Even big commercial companies send their executives to such courses. The philosophy of the Gita goes much beyond that. The third hurdle is the mental impediment about the availability of time. This again is baseless, for one can always find a few minutes in a day, even while traveling to work, to ponder over spiritual matters, or read about it. The fourth hurdle is the problem of how to go about it. Who would guide and tell whether the path taken is correct or not? And so on. The Gita answers many of these questions and suggests many paths, which one may choose from depending upon one's personality. Executives and professionals, by virtue of the nature of their work, are constrained to practice a materialistic approach to life. They are therefore subject to all the stresses derived therefrom. The stresses and the resultant problems of health can be avoided, and one can have a happy life if one understands and follows the basic philosophy of the Gita Dnyaneshwari. The changes in attitude give happiness and lay a foundation for the current life, as well as life after retirement. The changes are transmitted to one's family, who also become happy. A few can pursue the spiritual path while leading a normal life and attain experience of God. Thus, this translation, which concentrates on the philosophy of Gita as interpreted by Saint Dnyaneshwari, is eminently suitable for the intellectual class. The Gita. Some historical information. The Gita is considered as a part of the epic Mahabharata. Traditional belief is that the Gita comprises of the advice given by Lord Krishna to a disheartened Arjuna when the armies of Pandavas and Kauravas were standing face to face on the Kurukshetra battlefield. On the first day, Arjuna saw all his elders whom he revered as well as his cousins and friends, against whom he would be fighting, and was unnerved by the thought that so many people would be killed during the war. He therefore refused to fight. This was a shock to Sri Krishna, who was his charioteer. Sri Krishna then gave a profound advice to Arjuna, which is now known as the Gita. The pious strongly believe that the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna really did occur. They also believe that even during his lifetime, Sri Krishna was known as an avatar of Lord Vishnu. However, an intellectual is bound to get several doubts in his mind regarding the veracity of this legend, and therefore applicability of the philosophy discussed in the Gita. Common sense would tell that the advice in the Gita in the present form was given on the battlefield as stated. Even in verse form, it takes about 2 hours for recitation of the 700 shlokas, verses of the Gita. In prose, it would take much longer. Can the armies wait on the battleground for such a long time? Besides, when one reads the Gita, it is quite clear that Arjuna would have understood his folly after what was said in the early part of the second chapter. There would not be any need to go into the details of Sankhya and Vedanta philosophy and philosophy of the paths of action and of devotion, topics which have no relevance under the circumstances. The Gita therefore must have been a peacetime composition. Historical research does trace the philosophy of Gita to Sri Krishna. However, it also casts doubts on many of the traditional beliefs, as will be seen in the following. The text of Mahabharata has had many additions made to it over the 2 millennia it has been in existence. A critical edition of Mahabharata has been prepared by the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Pune, and is considered as reliable version of the epic. Today it contains about 100,000 verses. Its study has revealed that over the ages, 5 persons have contributed to the text. This may be confirmed from the research made by Mr. M.R. Yardi, presented in his book titled Mahabharata, Its Genesis and Growth, a statistical study published by the Bhandarkar Institute. Mr. Yardi, a eminent administrator and scholar now in Pune, is the author of similar analytical books on Ramayana and the Gita. He is also well known for his translations of Dnyaneshwari in Marathi prose, Hindi and English, published by Bharatiya Vidya Vidyaban. The essence of his study is as follows. I am grateful to Mr. Yardi for making his analytical publications available to me. The original version named Jaya composed immediately after the Great Mahabharata War, which took place a little earlier than 1000 BC, according to Western scholars, and much earlier according to some Indian scholars, was written by the great Rishi Vyas. It mainly described the family feud and the war. This composition is now lost. But a generation later, in around 950 BC, Rishi Vaishampayana retold the events to King Janamejaya, great-grandson of Arjuna, during the snake sacrifice, Sarpabhaina, performed in order to avenge the killing of his father Parikshita by Takshaka, the king of snakes. This narration was known as Para. Additions to this version were made much later in about 450 BC by Sudha and his son Sati, who were well-known Puranics, mythological storytellers. This was known as Mahabharata. Further additions were made by one Harivanshakara in the 2nd century BC, and still later by Parvasangrahakara. In the 1st century BC, Harivanshakara also added Harivansha, a biography of Sri Krishna, which is considered to be part of Mahabharata today. Through a statistical analysis of the Anushtap meter used in the shlokas, stanzas, of the epic Mahabharata, Mr. Yardi has been able to separate the contribution of each of the editions as follows. Original Jaya by V.S. had 8,800 shlokas. Bharat by Rishi Vaishampayana had 21,162 shlokas. Sudha contributed 17 to 8 year. This makes a total of 75,596 shlokas, and together with Harivansha, which has 73 shlokas. The total size of the Mahabharata epic is 80-16-70 shlokas. Different copies of Mahabharata give different numbers of shlokas. Yardi has used the critical edition by Sukatankar, 1944, available with the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Pune. The analysis also shows that the Gita was added to Mahabharata by Sati, who lived around 450 BC. Sri Krishna was deified and considered as an avatar of Lord Vishnu, some centuries after he died, but before Sati's time, thus enabling him to present Sri Krishna as the supreme God. In his scholarly book, the Bhagavad Gita, as a synthesis, Yardi gives the following interesting information related to Sri Krishna and the source of the philosophies presented by Sati through his lips in the role of the supreme God. There is sufficient evidence in Mahabharata to show that in his time Sri Krishna was considered as a human being and not an avatar. The deity worshipped in those times was Lord Shiva, whom Sri Krishna also worshipped. He had propitiated Lord Shiva to obtain a boon of a son from Rukmini and again from another wife, Jambavati. After he received the boon, Uma, wife of Lord Shiva, was delighted by his devotion to Lord Shiva, and she too granted him boons, addressing him as Amaraprabhava, Re1, possessed of prowess equal to that of an immortal. Also, during a dialogue with Bhishma regarding the glory of Lord Shiva, Sri Krishna refers to himself as a mere human being, and therefore not in a position to know that great God, who was the final goal of all good men. However, Sri Krishna was credited with high degree of spiritual power, and was recognized by the Vrishni clan, to which Sri Krishna belonged, as a human god. In the days of Sati, he came to be recognized as a partial avatar of Vishnu. Though he is referred to as a cowherd in Sutta Sati's version of the epic, the stories of his being a child god in Gokul and his playing with gopis occur only in the editions by Harivanshakara. The legends which connect him with Radha, his favorite gopi, occurs for the first time in 900 AD. Radha is not at all mentioned either in Mahabharata, not even in the Harivanshakara's additions to it, though the latter primarily deals with the biography of Sri Krishna. Some scholars belonging to the Varshni clan, though they themselves followed the Pankratra, same as Bhagwat or Bhakti, path-worshipping Vishnu, showed an interest in the Vedanta philosophy of the Upanishads. Sri Krishna, belonging to the Varshni tribe, must have also shown such interest and gone to the Rishi Gora, Angiras, for receiving instructions in the subject. Now, Sri Krishna's ancestor was Yadu, the son Yayati by Devayani, who was the daughter of the Ashura priest Shukracharya Dutt. She was cursed by Kacha that she will not marry a Brahmin, and married the Kshatriya Yayati. Shukracharya, also known as Ushanas, himself was the grandson of Rishi Bhrigu. The Bhargava clan must have held Sri Krishna in high regard because of this connection to Bhrigu, and therefore preserved his philosophical teachings. Shaunaka Muni, himself a Bhargava, must have known about these teachings and prevailed upon Sati, whom he met during the 12-year Yajna session conducted by him in the Nemiyamisha forest, to incorporate them in Mahabharata. Thus, though the scene depicted by Sati about Sri Krishna advising Arjuna on the battlefield is a fiction written to fit the text, the philosophy itself is what Sri Krishna had learnt from Gora Angiras. Sati must have been a mental giant to have stringed together a spiritual guide that is Gita, presenting us with a synthesis of the Vedanta philosophy with other philosophies known in Sati's time, namely the Sankhya, Yoga, and Bhakti, devotion, and the various paths like the path of knowledge, yoga, action, and devotion, for different kinds of personalities. One intriguing aspect of the Gita, relevant to modern times, concerns the caste system prevalent in India. One cannot blame Sati for his views on the caste system, because that was the belief current in those days. It is one of the bases of Dharma or code of conduct, and is intriguing because it is difficult to explain how God, the creator of all, should differentiate between his children, and why a divine edict was practiced only in India is prevailing only in India. The caste system got a temporary knock after Buddhism spread, and many subsequent sects like Nath Panth and Mahanubhava Panth did not bother about the caste system, or even religion. But that was only temporary. Thus we see that the philosophy of Gita is what Sri Krishna was very much familiar with, and passed on to Sati. It must be noted from the above analysis what an unusual person Sri Krishna must have been. A warrior, a diplomat, a philosopher, a strategist, a moralist, a family person, and a yogi, and undoubtedly worthy of being considered as an avatar, with all the divine manifestations mentioned in the 10th chapter of the Gita. The pious, of course, are not much bothered about the historical aspects, and for a spiritual seeker, it does not really matter. For all spiritual paths use the impermanent material objects like the body to reach the permanent soul, or Brahman, or God.